up, everybody? This is Heather, back with another video for you on literary lessons. On this channel we look at a lot of YA books and we talk about what we like about them, what literary elements are in them, and if I were to teach them, how would I teach them? First up today is kind of a June Pride Month wrap-up. I have 3 books from Alice Oseman, the creator of the Heartstopper graphic novel series, which I am in love with. And then one other clip that I filmed a little bit earlier from Kekla Magoon. She wrote a bunch of books in my last video, so check that out after this video if you want some more good recs. Kicking it off, first thing, we're going to talk about Loveless by Alice Oseman. This was the first book that I read after the Heartstopper graphic novel series, and I was really excited to read something else by her. This is a novel. There are no illustrations, but some of the similar techniques that Alice Oseman is known for are present here. The protagonist in this book, her name is Georgia, and she's having a tough time because it feels like everyone around her is in a couple, or should be, or she wants to be in a couple because that's what society's telling her to do. She's never been kissed yet. It's like the end of high school when this book first starts, before they get to college, which is where the book takes the most place in. And she feels a little bit of pressure to like make these things happen for her that are societal norms, at least in her mind. But every time the opportunity presents itself, she recoils from it, feels disgusted by it, and that makes some more confusion for her because she's trying to figure out, why do I feel this way when society says I shouldn't? When she gets to college, she experiments a little bit more with friends, and it gets messy, just kissing and stuff, but it gets messy and feelings get hurt, and they kind of have to work through that. And she also is just trying to like live her college life experience as a first-year student as well. Ultimately, she learns to love the situation she's in, love herself, and be able to identify in a way that makes her feel comfortable. If I'm totally honest with you, I did not love this book. It wasn't that I have no love for this book, which would be ironic, but it just didn't fit. It didn't grab me. It didn't keep me going. And I don't think it's because of the storyline necessarily. I was so excited to read about an aromantic asexual character because I don't think that's something that's really out there very much, especially in YA. Although, honestly, that's probably going to be where that character breaks through. So anyway, I was really excited for that, but I think I would prefer a novel that shows a character who's already comfortable in their skin and then have their life after that. This was a lot of like, I should be feeling this way, but I don't. Wah. And that's a little harsh, but I skimmed it. I had to just like, you know, skip a couple pages, keep reading, keep going through, because I wanted to finish it. I wanted to honor this book. I think it's an important story that is gonna be helpful for people. It's just not the story I was looking for in this book with this character. So Alice Oseman seems to like to write in the same world. She has all of these Heartstopper books and novellas and like offshoots, and actually this book does mention some similar settings from the Heartstopper series. So maybe she'll write an offshoot of this. Maybe Georgia will get her own graphic novel at some point. I would love that. I would love to check that out. And again, oh, I'm not in focus. And again, this also was my first novel written by Alice Oseman that I have read. She's written other novels, but just not ones I've read. And I think I was ready for, like I had talked about earlier in my other video about the Heartstopper series, I was ready for the poetry that comes with her storytelling that's so apparent in the Heartstopper series. And I don't know, I felt like I was lacking a little bit of that with just straight up novel. I also want to say this is a long YA book. This book is, oh, also I just realized there are no page numbers in this book. I was gonna say this book is really long, probably close to 350 pages, maybe closer to 400, and that's really long for a YA genre. I felt that some of the things may have been able to have been trimmed out of this, but yeah, there we go. I wouldn't teach this book, but I would probably stock it in my high school library shelf just so that people who are looking for stories like this can find themselves in this book. And that's that. Okay. On to some other, okay, am I in focus? I literally cannot see myself this far away. I really hope that I'm in focus. Okay, on to the other 2 books that I read though. These are the Heartstopper yearbooks, and Here we have this one, Heartstopper Yearbook, and the continuation novella of Nick and Charlie in the Heartstopper series. So let's give it up for these books. If you haven't yet learned who Nick and Charlie are, go watch my other video that talks about them. They're these two wonderful boys in years 12 and 13 in British high school system, and they are kind of trying to figure out, in this one, they're trying to figure out what to do after Nick graduates because he's a year older. So that's this book. Really good. There are some images included in this book, but it's mostly prose. And in the yearbook, there are a lot of images, including some of Alice Oseman's very first drawings of Nick and Charlie. So that's really fun to see. It's kind of like her personal yearbook of creating this series, as well as a couple of other mini comics and just extensions of the Heartstopper universe. So yeah, just love it, love it, love it. These are great reads for Pride Month. Alice Oseman is a great author to check out for Pride Month and all year long. Of course, all of my students who have read her work are just in love with it. So I would highly recommend to a reluctant reader or someone who just loves to read. They're good, they'll hook you and they'll keep you to the end. Another book that I read this month happens to fit into the Pride motif. I didn't realize that this book would lean so heavily in that direction in terms of like relationship. I thought it was going to be more about processing grief, but the -1 Club by Kekla Magoon does lean heavily into, like I said, that personal relationship between the protagonist and another boy at his high school, and it is such a good book. I'll just insert it here. I'll insert here what I thought about it. I was not expecting what happened inside that book at all, especially coming off of the graphic novel series, but The -1 Club by Kekla Magoon is another great read for Pride. It was not at all what I was expecting, and that's kind of why I wanted to share this with you today, so that you might be able to adjust your expectations as needed going into it. What I knew going into this book was that there's a boy who loses his sister. Then he goes to school like the next week and receives a note in his locker saying something like, "Hey, come meet up with us," and it's signed -1. And you can kind of do the math on that one. It's a group of people that meet who have also lost someone, so -1 from their families. So he gets to this group, they meet at lunch. Once I started reading, this is kind of what I found out more. He gets to this group, they meet at lunch, and they're there to support each other in their grief. As you read, you kind of start to realize this group of teenagers has no idea how to properly support one another in this grief, because grief is super complex and unique to the individual, but there are still some things that are helpful to do when dealing with grief, like talking about it or like feeling your feelings. And this group kind of pushes all of that to the side and just says, we don't talk about it, we just ignore it and get on with our lives. And that can be really helpful, but it can also be really unhelpful, as this book kind of explores later on. And it's the later on portion of this book that I was not expecting, and it gets dark and it gets deep, and it all happens within like the last maybe like 60 pages, so prepare yourself. That's all I'm gonna say, is just prepare yourself as you read. There are heavy topics in here, there are trigger warning topics in here, and if you are a sensitive reader, and that's totally fine if you are, just maybe look up trigger warnings for what you're about to read, and if that's something that's not right for you to read, then don't read this book. Read something else. But just, just put it out there. It's a great book because this is a real topic, grief, death, and the way that people deal with it, and the way that they don't deal with it, is also very real. So I just appreciate Kekla Magoon's real writing. And I will say, I started to get a little bit worried because when I got to like the end of it, when big stuff started happening in this book, because her other books are so real and the characters are so authentic that there's not always a happy ending, or it's not always resolved. It's concluded, but maybe not resolved. And I was a little worried that that was gonna happen here. And I'll just let you figure out, I'll just let you read it and you can see what you think at the ending. But yeah, it just worth the note going into it. I think it's also worth recognizing that I was coming off of the Heartstopper series reading this book. And this book does take place in a high school with two boys who end up falling in love. It's not really that much of a surprise. Or like kind of wrestling with that. One boy's out, one boy's not. And so it's their journey. And that's kind of similar to the Heartstopper journey. But, oh, I just heard something. Hello? Hello? Oh, hi! So that's really similar to the Heartstopper series, and that book is more light. Even if in its heaviness, it's lighter than this book. So I think that coming off of that and not being prepared for what's in here really kind of shook me a little bit, to be honest, in the last several pages. Otherwise though, this book is wonderful. One fun thing too, in terms of writing techniques, is it's written in several short chapters, again, which makes you feel like you're progressing quickly, which is great for a YA book. It's written in first person. It has some like darker colored pages, more gray pages, and those represent the dreams that the narrator has. It's not exactly flashback, it's like dream flashback, which is kind of interesting, and that's when he gets to interact with his dead sister. So that's an interesting writing technique. And I always like to note when books shout out other books, and in this one it mentions Shel Silverstein's book of poems, Where the Sidewalk Ends. So it says, I used to read Shel Silverstein poems out of this book called Where the Sidewalk Ends. I like to think we lived where the glaciers ended, to imagine us sitting on the cliffside at the edge of the world. Anyway, so that's interesting. It's interesting having read the rest of the book to recognize how this illusion is being used. Cliffs and edges are a motif in this book, and it's interesting that they're able to tie it in with Where the Sidewalk Ends here. This is definitely a high school book, probably a high school personal choice book, maybe a high school book group book. Not a read aloud, not a whole class novel, but worth reading all the same. That is the -1 Club by Kekla Magoon. Go check it out and see what you think. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and happy reading.